schools indoctrinate you. They don't actually encourage you to think for yourself. It's all about prepping and priming you for the workforce. So without going into too much of a rabbit hole, I was talking to my husband today and we were talking about education systems, and we were comparing our experiences because I grew up in Canada. So I went to university in Canada, I went to high school in Canada, and he grew up in Mexico. He did high school in Mexico and he went to university in Mexico. And the story started off with him telling me how he was a really big troublemaker in school, but that his parents raised him to not really worry too much about his grades. Obviously, they didn't want him to flunk out, but they didn't worry about him being the top of his class or getting amazing marks. They just wanted him to be a kid, to be a good person, but to enjoy those life experiences of growing up. And my parents weren't insanely strict about marks, but I definitely was raised in a family where doing well in school mattered. But I realized today that there was such an emphasis on getting good marks and doing well in school, especially in high school, because it genuinely mattered. In Canada, your marks in high school matter for university. In Mexico, they don't. In Mexico, when you apply to university, you have to write an entrance exam, but that's it. They don't look at your marks from high school. So I think that's also a reason why my husband's parents weren't really worried about his marks. They were like, go be a kid. I want you to learn something, but I want it to come from you. I don't want you to just memorize what your teacher is telling you. I want you to genuinely find things interesting and to explore those things for yourself. Whereas for me, I tend to try to memorize information, but then I find that I don't actually retain it. And so there are moments where I question my intelligence because I'll know that I was taught something in school, whether it's about mitosis or geography facts or historical facts, and yet I can't articulate what those concepts mean. And it often makes me feel quite stupid and that something's wrong with me, or that maybe I have a learning disability, or maybe I have very insanely early stage dementia. Genuinely, these are things that I worry about. But then I realized that it's not a question of my intelligence. It's the fact that the way that I was conditioned and raised as a human to view and experience education and learning was primarily through this lens of getting good grades and memorizing factual information. I don't know if that was redundant, but memorizing information. In Canada, we have both public and private schools. And I went to a private high school, which means that you pay money to go. It's not publicly funded by the government. And my parents chose a very strict Catholic school that was super strict and rigid and placed a lot of emphasis and value on STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math. There was music and art courses, but honestly, it was very mechanistic. It wasn't really about artistry and creativity. It was more so about like drawing what you see and playing around with different mediums, whether it's pastels or watercolors. But I don't know, there wasn't an emphasis on finding your voice as a creator. Especially when you're young, I think that that's really important. And I do remember feeling incredibly stressed out for the majority of my middle school to high school years, because when I started in grade 5, which means I think I was around 10 or something, that there were 14 exams a year that I had in grade 5 as a child. And I think that that was the year that they stopped recess and all of these things. And I got myself really sick with mononucleosis because of the stress that I had from school. Now, you can't get mononucleosis from stress usually, but like if your immune system is down, then it puts you at a greater risk of getting mononucleosis. The point is that the schooling that I went to was incredibly rigid. There was such an emphasis on marks that you don't have time to be creative, to really be curious. And the way that they examined us and tested us was always about memorization or being very technical, and it was incredibly stressful. And they prided themselves on teaching you math from a year above you, or teaching you entry-level university physics when you're in grade 10, all of which many people would say, oh my God, wow, that's so amazing, and there's so much academic rigor at this school. And also at the same time, I think it's really fucked up that you are putting so much pressure on kids to be at a greater level that adults or young adults are at. And it also takes away such a critical time in a child's life to find their voice, or at least to be encouraged to practice their creativity, to go outside and have adventures and make friends, not to mature too fast. And that's something that makes me really frustrated about the type of school that I went to, because it was inherently about shaping us for the workforce and shaping us to be disciplined humans for the world. And I know that not everybody has that experience. Some people had really amazing high school experiences. Some people went to art school, and that just wasn't my experience. And something that my husband always says to me is that he absolutely hates school, and he thinks it's the biggest waste of time, because schools indoctrinate you. They don't actually encourage you to think for yourself. It's all about prepping and priming you for the workforce. And it's about making you a good studier, a diligent researcher, just someone that's effective and productive to create capital, or to be able to, in some way, shape, or form, contribute to the economy. And so obviously inherently within that, you're not going to want to nurture individuality and creativity and critical thinking, because that could inherently pose a threat to the overarching goal of our dominant, powerful economic system, which is capitalism, because capitalism thrives on productivity and efficiency. And if you have a bunch of people that are wanting to be themselves and to think differently and choose more niche career paths, that poses a threat to the status quo. I also think that part of the reason why marks matter so much, or why there was such an emphasis on it, is because it does actually matter for going to university. And if you fuck up your last 2 years of high school, you could potentially be shooting yourself in the foot when it comes to applying to university, and you might not get into the university that you want. And if you don't get into the university that you want, or universities at all, then what are you going to do with your life if you're not going to post-secondary education? Oh, you're going to be a plumber, and God knows that that's not a successful job. Hilarious thing is that, like, we need plumbers more than we need marketing consultants, but there's this whole fear narrative, that if you don't get into university, you're going to be a bum, you're going to be homeless, you're going to be unsuccessful. And I internalized those fears and those beliefs super deeply. I was so incredibly stressed about not going to university, because you're also fed this dream, I don't even know if it's the American dream. It's like the educated dream of having that classic dorm university experience where you go to frat parties and you drink so much and you're on campus with your books and you meet your friends. Like, there's so much fear attached to university, in the sense that you're not going to make friends, that you're going to be stunted for life, that you're not going to get a job, that you're not going to have opportunities. And it's a very real fear. And I'm sure that there are many instances where, like, someone didn't go to university and unfortunately they had less opportunities. But the problem is that there are also many people that choose not to go to university because they know that it's not the right choice for them, and they pave their own path in life, whether it's starting a YouTube career, or becoming a plumber, or starting your own independent business, or being an entrepreneur. Whatever it is, there are options, but that we are fed this scarcity fear narrative that, well, I don't know if there's a scarcity narrative, but we are fed this fear narrative that university and higher education is the most obvious and important thing that you need to do as a young adult. And if you don't do it, something's wrong with you, or you're fucked up. And so with that being said, the way that I learned in my schooling before university was completely fear-based, and I was worried about not getting good grades, to the point where, like, I don't have time to be curious or to really take time to digest information. I was constantly just trying to memorize it so that I could do well and continue to the next test that I had probably that same week. And I know that every school is different, so I'm just speaking from my experience, but I also have seen this kind of fear in people around me of my age, and it makes me really sad and also very jealous of the people that escaped that reality. I think it's kind of hard though when you live in Canada or a country that treats education kind of in that way, in a very competitive, hierarchical, marks-based way. And obviously when there's a lot of people, you can't help but have it be in that format. I was talking to my parents' friend who is a professional musician and they work in Barcelona, and they were saying that a lot of musicians actually look at European musicians like a little bit condescendingly, because European musicians lack this technical, they're still very incredibly technical, but they lack this technical accuracy that, for example, musicians from China or more densely populated countries have, because at that point creativity or artistry and being musical matter much less than being 100% perfect in every note that you play, because competition is already so high and there are so many musicians. So what are you going to value more? Probably the person that doesn't make a mistake, but it's those people that are now getting all of the jobs because they absolutely kill it under pressure and they make no mistakes. But then there are other musicians that are actually way more musical, that have way more feeling and emotion when they play, but they don't get the role because maybe they made a slight mistake or they were a little bit off somewhere. And so it's actually really sad seeing those things happen, because now we're getting further away from valuing creativity and artistry and emotionality, and it's more about technical flawlessness, a certain type of purity, if you may, a certain type of intelligence, and certain types of skills, and how efficient and productive someone or something is. So I said this already, but I was watching an interview today and Bell Hooks was saying how our education system preps you for the marketplace, not for liberation.
And I think what's really tragic about education, particularly at a higher level in our nation right now, is that it has become to be something that is about the marketplace, so that there's a lot of repression that students begin to do because they want to prepare themselves for the marketplace, for getting the money and getting the power and getting the status and getting the fame. And that means that you can't always say what you want to say.
This is not an attack on teachers, who I am sure are aware, or many of them are aware of these issues, and they stress and tear their hair out about it. So it's not an attack on teachers, it's a critique on the system. And in a world where there is so much fast-paced goings on, that time feels like a luxury that many can't afford, you don't have time to think about how you feel, or time to really think about why you act in a particular way. You don't necessarily have time to ask yourself questions about society and why we are all so obsessed with consumption, as an example. And also with social media and our phones as now just this forever sidekick that we have in our pocket, humans can basically go the rest of their lives without ever being bored, because if you're bored, then you can just take out your phone and you can start scrolling. But being bored is actually a really important gateway to getting your mind back and to start thinking for yourself. But if you're constantly inundating your brain with other people's ideas, other people's TikToks, and just content out there that is not yours, obviously I think you're going to slowly start to lose the ability to think for yourself, to remember that you can read a book, that you can research something that's been on your mind and have a conversation with friends about it, whatever it is. And I think that this is a really good segue into, okay, but what can we do now? Because it's not possible to radically change the entire educational system. Like, it's entrenched and there is so much money in place to keep these systems, these educational institutions, functioning in the way that they do and to be delivering education or material in the way that they do. But I think even one piece of advice that I can give is to start to become more self-aware when you automatically jump to your phone to fill dead space or to fill some boredom gap in your life, because slowly starting to pull yourself out from this pressure, this externalized pressure to just be busy all the time and to produce more and to do more, if you can slowly start to decouple yourself from that, I think you'll also at the same time start to gain your mind back and your time back, and you can choose more consciously how you spend it. Also, it's really hard because we live in a society where it almost feels like there's so much pressure to optimize yourself. Sometimes you can learn, or you can honor your curiosity, or you can read books without having this pressure that those things need to somehow add to your personal resume. I've definitely fallen into that trap of doing things because I feel this pressure to build myself up, but it's for an external reason. It's outside of myself. And so giving myself the permission to create or to just have hobbies that I don't monetize, or I just do them because I enjoy them, or to read the books that genuinely pique my interest, to not always read a self-help book, to not always listen to a self-help podcast. I can listen to things that are just entertaining, or I can give myself time on the computer to Google some world history or to learn about economics just for the sake of it. I think has been really refreshing and nice, and also slowly starting to detach myself from my phone. And also, I can't change the way that I was brought up, but I can slowly start to become more aware of when I have this drive to memorize something, and to give myself the grace and the exciting opportunity to actually know what it feels like to genuinely resonate with a concept and understand it to the point where I could explain it back to somebody. You'll know that you understand something when you can explain it to somebody clearly and concisely. And so, of course, part of me is jealous that my husband has such a different relationship with education, and that he didn't go through so many years being afraid of being a loser, therefore putting myself into school, and more school, as if it was this security blanket that would shield me from the woes and throes of life. Of course, there's a part of me that feels jealous that he doesn't have that trauma, because genuinely it does feel like little T trauma. But again, that's my story, and I wouldn't be here talking about it if I didn't go through it. And also, I think it's important because it allows me to share my story to hopefully help other people, that your marks are not an indication of your worth as a person or your intelligence, that school is not the only way to make it through life and to quote unquote be successful, because what even is that anyways? That obedience isn't actually a reward for you necessarily if it doesn't come from a genuine place of, oh, I want this. Obedience out of fear is a reward for someone else at your cost. Memorization, yes, can be efficient, but in the long run, does it actually stick with you in a sustainable way? I would argue it doesn't, unless you have a picture perfect memory. Then this video is not for you. But arguably, memorization is more of a waste of time, because you're going to have to go back at some point in your life to relearn what you memorized, because eventually it's going to leave your brain. And also just the fact of, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I also just wanted to say, in a world where we have artificial intelligence with us all the time, that your curiosity and your creativity is the opposite of inefficient. It's actually the lifeline of what makes you you, and what differentiates you from an AI bot that can likely do everything else better and more efficient than you. And it's your individuality and your soul that matters. And so it's a disservice to yourself to allow these external systems to scare you into negating who you are, to just put your head down, to get a good job, or to just continue to be in school because you're afraid that without it, you're not going to be able to find your way. There is so much, we're in a time where there's so much information out there. YouTube is like a overflowing library, but also we have libraries. We should use them, and we should continue to read books, and we should continue to have conversations, and we should continue to follow our curiosities. You know, it's not about halting learning at all. It's about relearning how to love learning, because I think that unfortunately schools actually take away from us love of learning, and they make us so revolted by what the process of learning should look like as dictated by them. So here's a big cheers to reclaiming learning for ourselves. Let me know in the comments what you do to learn or to unlearn harmful ways that school kind of made you think about knowledge and knowledge acquisition, or let me know if this video resonated with you in any other way. Thanks for making it this far for my teeny video on my teeny channel. It's been definitely a journey to get here to even record a video, lots of self-doubt and self-criticism, but I'm just going to do it no matter how bad they are in the beginning. I'm just going to continue to learn because I genuinely want this outlet for myself, for my brain, and at the end of the day, I just want to build community and I want to be that like helping hand or that friend walking alongside this journey with you. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.